What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have a few areas that we're potentially going to be looking at today for possible development based on models, based on climatological data, and a few other factors that we have been. This is kind of going to be a continuation of yesterday's video, and taking a bit deeper of a look into the possible areas and possible conditions that we're going to be looking at for development, particularly in the main development region as well as in the Western Gulf. Those are the two areas we're mainly going to be focusing on today, and then we're going to have some fun at the end by showing some ensemble and operational runs just to kind of see what's going on over the next 2 weeks, just to kind of neatly wrap that up in a nice little bow. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it right here. So here's the situation that we're looking at right here. We're looking at some pretty interesting conditions that are going to be starting to format over the next few days or so. First of all, we have an MJO favorable area that's going to be expected to be developing in the Western Atlantic. We're going to go ahead and start by pulling up the GFS ensembles right here, shifting to the world view right here, and then moving it up to the 200 millibar height anomalies right here. This is what we're looking at, our divergence that's going to be going on. And why I've said this like a broken record, but basically what you're looking for with an MJO setup, a good MJO setup, is you're looking at pretty much convergence at the surface and divergence aloft. 200 millibars bars is obviously aloft. It's in the upper atmosphere at that current point, and it's pretty much divergence aloft is indicative, and it's better for upflow for updrafts, better for convection initiation, all of that stuff. That's why when MJOs do happen, you see a large amount of convection just fire up across a lot of regions. You see that during hurricane season. We actually saw that last year during Debbie in Cuba, the Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, much of Central America. You just start seeing a lot of convection just blowing up, especially in the early evening and lasting through much of the night. So that's the kind of stuff we're paying attention to right here. And already we're looking at least in the next 7 days, a more favorable environment for convection and tropical cyclones to develop in the Western Atlantic region. And areas that are in this orange-ish color right here is convergence aloft. So basically convergence aloft, divergence at the surface. That is not favorable for convective initiation right there. So that's just the general gist as to what we're looking at right here. But watch how this will evolve in the next few days. About by 10 days out, according to this run right here, we're looking at a very strong MJO signal across much of the Americas right here, from pretty much all the way from Canada all the way down to Argentina right here across the Americas. But the strongest signal is in the Eastern Pacific and the Caribbean Sea, as well as the Gulf region as well. And then you're also noticing the convergence area in Africa starting to decrease quite a bit, so we're going to want to pay attention to that as well. You're starting to notice that decrease quite a bit as well, while this area right here stays relatively strong across much of the Americas and the Western Hemisphere right here, going out to 16 days, and you're looking at a pretty favorable environment in terms of convective initiation for much of the Atlantic around this current time. So you're going to want to pay very, very close attention to that. That's kind of the first thing we're paying attention to right here. And ultimately, what you're going to see is you're going to see more convection starting to flare up across a lot of regions. We're already starting to see that a little bit more off Central America. And those areas right here, we can actually see if we can pull up a longer frame, about 120 hours. Just to show you what's been going on. Yeah, we're seeing a lot more convection flaring up across much of Central America. That's the MJO starting to kick in a little bit right here, as well as the Central American gyre starting to get its act together as well. We're going to want to pay attention to that, but you're seeing more convection generally than yesterday across a lot of these tropical regions in Colombia, Venezuela, and those areas as well. I do hope the Venezuela region does see more rainfall going forward because of the wildfire smoke that we're potentially looking at right here. I hope they see more convection to help cool down those fires as well. So that would be really nice to happen. But I'm also going to go ahead and check the Eastern Atlantic as well. Just look at satellite imagery to see what's coming up ahead. So here's what we have. We had a tropical wave, a small one, I believe, move out into off the coast of Africa last night, and now it's shifting over here to 30 hours. You're seeing a lot more convection starting to blow up across much of the Sahel region, as well as that monsoon continues to kick in. It's going to peak pretty much, I would say, starting in July, which is also, funny enough, when the Sahara air dust outbreaks really started to pick up as well and move through much of the Atlantic region. Let's go ahead now and actually go back to the Atlantic wide area and go to true color right here. You can see that Sahara dust right now, actually. You're looking at the Sahara dust right now across a lot of these regions. It's in the main development region. It's in parts of the Caribbean as well. That is right now not favorable for development. Yes, you have the extremely warm waters. You have weaker than average wind shear in some areas, but that Sahara dust is why tropical cyclones take so long and hurricane season takes so long for things to really ramp up, and that's why they don't ramp up typically until August right there. So we're going to want to pay attention to that as well, and see how the Sahara air layer really starts to pick up a lot of the stuff that's going on. So let's actually go ahead and pivot to that using the GFS run real quickly. I know the GFS is the GFS, but that goes out the furthest, and it can give us an idea as to what we're potentially looking at. Let's go ahead and go to the North Atlantic and go to not MSLP and precip, relative humidity right here. So here's what we have going on. Starting right here, you're starting to see more Sahara dust moving out as well. You're seeing a pretty dry environment across a lot of these regions right now in the main development region especially. But as time continues to go on and the ITCZ continues to get more active and move further and further up to the north, into the northern hemisphere, you're going to start to notice more moisture moving through the MDR, less dry air across much of the region. Yes, there is another Sahara air outbreak coming up in the next week or so that we're going to want to pay attention to. That's going to move through the Caribbean. But after that, you're going to start seeing a lot more noise, and you're going to start seeing a lot less dry air, at least temporarily for a little bit, until it gets put. And I am noticing this a little bit. The later part of the GFS wants some of that dry air and some of that Sahara dust to get pushed up to Europe, which, if that's the case, that would be interesting. It's having a pretty strong low pressure system over parts of Algeria right here, which basically low pressure, that's a counterclockwise flow, and that ultimately is that flow is ultimately what is pushes the Sahara dust out of the Atlantic and more towards Europe later in the season. If we do start seeing something like that develop, which they are showing signals of that potentially happening, at least starting about 10 to 12 days out, which I don't know if that's going to hold or not. But if we do start seeing that, we could definitely see a pretty big decrease in the amount of Sahara dust going into July. That is something to pay attention to right there. And I also am going to show you the anomalies right here as well, showing if the air is more moist or more dry than average right here. So here's the situation that we have right here. So basically, we're seeing mixed signal, more noise. Yes, you have another Sahara air outbreak going on. But then, as the monsoon really starts to kick up, you're noticing this as well, looking at these green anomalies across Mali, Mauritania, and much of Western Africa. The region over there, it has a lot more moisture than average, and that's also indicative of a more active Sahel region than average as well. More active monsoon season as that starts to pick up as well. We're going to want to pay very close attention to that, because that could be indicative of how strong the tropical waves are, how good quality they are, and just how much moisture and how much convection do initiate over that part of Africa and kind of keep the Sahara dust at bay at times. And then starting about 9 days out, you're seeing a pretty big moisture plume going through much of the main development region right there. And that's something you're going to want to pay attention to right there, ladies and gentlemen, because as you're seeing a lot more moisture than average, you're going to see those chances and probabilities of tropical development, especially as you get into late June, really start to turn up. And climatologically, especially over the last 10 years, late June is typically when you start seeing a kind of a bit of a small burst in tropical activity happening in parts of the MDR and the Caribbean and those areas as well to pay attention to. We had a few cases of that. We had I believe it was Betty in 2022. We had Brett in 2023, 70-mile-per-hour tropical storm. Then we obviously had Beryl in 2024 that barreled through the Caribbean. Hopefully, we don't see that again. I do not think we will. But by and large, you do see that late June period as a bit of a spurt in tropical activity. And that is something you're going to want to pay attention to going forward, right there, especially as you're seeing these moisture returns coming in, and you're going to want to continue to monitor this, continue to pay attention to this, and we certainly will here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But it does become a bit more noisy on around June 21st or so, so we're going to want to watch that very, very, very closely, ladies and gentlemen. So that's what we have going on with the moisture component. Looking at some of the other factors, such as the wind shear. Let's go ahead and do that. Wind shear, pretty interesting. Pretty unfavorable right now for much of the Atlantic, with the exception of the northwestern Atlantic, where that low pressure system that's developing is currently at. However, it's going to be frontal in nature. NHC does no longer has it tagged as of yesterday, so that's something to watch as well. But you do notice a couple of pockets of lower wind shear in the subtropics, in parts of the MDR, in parts off the coast of Mexico right here. And even in the Caribbean, you're seeing like a 20-knot pocket of wind shear that's kind of weaker than what you would have around it. So wanting to pay attention to those patterns as well. Definitely am noticing a more weaker area of wind shear than before across much of the Caribbean. So we're going to want to pay attention to that to see, okay, how is the wind shear patterns going to evolve? And let's say if this season really starts to turn up in late June, like Patrick is saying, what's the wind shear parameters going to look like? So we can go ahead and show you that right here. Here is the 200 to 850 millibar wind shear. Then we will get to the anomalies for you, ladies and gentlemen. So let's go ahead and do this. So here's what we have with the wind shear across the eastern main development region. I'm noticing this. Definitely a weaker wind shear right here, but that's mainly concentrated in one spot. But starting about 5 days out, you're starting to notice a lot less wind shear. You're seeing that those wind shear pockets really starting to open up quite a bit, and you're going to want to pay attention to that as well. And by 10 days out, you're looking at most of the MDR just low wind shear and a lot more favorable for development. And coupling that with the moisture right here, at least the anomalies right here, yes, there is a bit of a mix. And that's also, though, when that moisture surge does start to move across parts of the main development region. You can also start seeing it right here as a tropical wave is expected to come off, and the Sahel region really starts to turn up with their monsoon season. So it's all intertwining together, ladies and gentlemen. So that's what we're looking at right there. And then as you move into the Eastern Caribbean, the wind shear does weaken more so as well. However, you still have this stubborn area of wind shear across the Gulf and across the Caribbean, Western Caribbean, that you're going to want to pay attention to. Yes, there are a couple pockets, but that's mainly because the GFS is being the GFS. I'm disregarding what's going on over here, mainly focusing more on big picture right here. But you are noticing, though, that the wind shear patterns do fluctuate. They go up and down, up and down. That's typically what you're seeing for the month of June. This is not atypical, I would say, for shear to fluctuate like this. But what I do find interesting is the MDR really starts to open up in terms of its chances. About the same time, you're seeing that moisture infusion from both the ITCZ and from the Sahel region really start to turn up. So you're going to want to pay attention to that stuff right there. Let's go ahead and look at the shear anomalies for you right here. Here's the shear anomalies. Lower than average in the northwestern Atlantic, not surprising. Eastern main development region, you're definitely seeing a lower than average wind shear return. You're also seeing a lower than average wind shear return when that moisture plume starts to move over, which is pretty interesting, I would say. And this isn't just one isolated area too. This is like relatively across much of the MDR by 12 days out, pretty much like by the 5-day mean of that equivalent. And then it moves into the Caribbean, and then it starts to get, you start to see above average shear returns as well. This is pretty typical for shear to go up, down, but what I do find curious is the MDR seems to be kind of the area to watch over the next 2 weeks because of those lower wind shear values, because of that moisture, and because of sea surface temperatures that we're going to go ahead and get into right now. So here's the SSTs. I normally talk about these first, but I wanted to talk about them last because I wanted to cover the other parameters first today just to go, okay, what does everything else look like before we even consider the SSTs right here? So here's what we have right here across much of the Atlantic Ocean. Across parts of the MDR near the Cabo Verde Islands and parts of those regions right here, definitely cooler than what you would expect. This is not really atypical or anything like that. This is what you would expect for it to happen. But the anomalies are pretty interesting, and we've talked about these a little bit as well, just pulling these up as well. For a more active hurricane season and more power to these tropical cyclones, you're going to want to look at a pattern like this. Essentially, what you have is above average sea surface temperatures in the tropics and below average sea surface temperatures in parts of the northern tropics and the subtropical regions as well that you're going to want to pay attention to. Also, we have a negative PNA, which is going to drive more systems closer to towards land, so we're going to want to pay attention to that. Also noticing a little bit of noise in parts of the Caribbean Sea as well. That's going to kind of take care of itself. Not too worried about that. Mainly focusing on the MDR, I would say, in terms of those anomalies. That's pretty concerning to me as a forecaster looking at that. Mainly for the reason that basically it's going to you have that temperature gradient, and you also have that probability that these tropical cyclones are going to be concentrated in a more condensed area instead of being widespread. And looking at possible things right there, that's going to tighten up the pressure gradients, I would say, as well. We're going to want to pay attention to that too. But ultimately, that's what we're looking at right now. You're looking at warmer SSTs in the Gulf and the Caribbean over here, 29 plus Celsius, 84 for those of you living in the United States, across the Bay of Campeche in Cuba, and in parts of the Loop Current as well. Going to want to pay attention to that. And then, and even in parts of the MDR, we're looking at 28 plus degrees Celsius as well, which is pretty good for tropical development already. But another thing I'm paying attention to is the ocean heat content. OHC has been really a big thing for me that kind of has scared me over the last few years. Here's what we have with the OHC right now. And we showed you this yesterday. We showed you the May 28th OHC yesterday. We're not going to show you that today, but here's what we're looking at. There are a few areas that have really turned up in terms of their OHC producing. The first is the Western Gulf. That has really turned up over the last week. Before, we were seeing a few isolated pockets like 50, maybe 70, of small areas, 75 max. Now we're seeing a large area of 50 plus OHC and a larger area of 75 areas that are just starting to pop up all over the place. Right here. Another area I'm concerned about, obviously, is the Northwestern Caribbean, mainly because you have the most OHC, and that's only going to continue to rise. But I'm also concerned about this area right here in the Atlantic Basin. We're seeing the OHC really starting to move further and further and further and further and further to the north than what we would like to see, especially for early June right here. And the more these waters do develop, and the more these waters do warm, the more the OHC is going to develop, and the more further to the north, that these are going to go. And that's going to give, especially those cyclones that stay out to sea and potentially put Bermuda and New England in the line of fire, more time to either intensify or consolidate before weakening and heading there. And that could mean stronger storms for Canada, for New England, for Bermuda, and a lot of other areas that we need to pay attention to right there. So that's some stuff that we're paying attention to. Those are the parameters as well that we've been watching right here, and that's why I'm putting the MDR on a bit more of an alert area than I would before, mainly because you have a more active MJO, you have more moisture than average that's going to be moving through, you're going to have less shear than average moving through, and you have those warm SSTs and OHC that's going to be going over there. So those are some things that we're going to continue to pay attention to, and those are some things that we're going to continue to update you here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, we are going to go ahead and close the video out right here. I really hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. If you want to come hang out with us, if you want to ask us questions or help us in the Tropical team at Storms United, be sure to join the Storms United Discord server. The link to that is in the end screen. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.